Hey Caleb, how are you?
Hey, Michelle, I'm doing pretty well today. How are you?
I'm good. I am really liking the cooler weather.
Yes.
And they're redoing my street, so I got to watch them tow cars today. Now
Yeah.
they're making lots of noise out there, so that's pretty exciting. And they didn't tow my car, just FYI.
That's good.
I know, right? Like, I mean, I feel bad for the person, but that car's been abandoned and sitting there for like 2.5 years. So I hope somebody else
Um,
gets it and enjoys it. That's my thought on that. We're
yeah.
talking about this. All right, moving on. Ready?
Yeah.
Because we have things to do. We have the gospel to read,
Mm-hmm.
and we have things to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So we should just get going, hey?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Caleb, would you read today?
I would be happy to.
You're the bestest.
And today's Bible reading is coming from Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as the meal was finished, he insisted that the disciples get in the boat and go ahead to the other side while he dismissed the people. With the crowd dispersed, he climbed the mountain so he could be by himself and pray. He stayed there alone late into the night. Meanwhile, the boat was far out to sea when the wind came up against them and they were battered by the waves. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came towards them, walking on the water. They were scared out of their wits. "A ghost," they said, crying out in terror. But Jesus was quick to comfort them. "Courage, it's me. Don't be afraid." Peter, suddenly bold, said, "Master, if it's really you, call me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come ahead." Jumping out of the boat, Peter walked on the water to Jesus. But when he looked down at the waves churning beneath his feet, he lost his nerve and started to sink. He cried, "Master, save me." Jesus didn't hesitate. He reached down and grabbed his hand. Then he said, "Faint heart, what got into you?" The two of them climbed into the boat, and the wind died down. The disciples in the boat, having watched the whole thing, worshiped Jesus, saying, "This is it. You are God's son for sure." And that's this week's gospel.
There's a lot.
Yeah,
There's always a lot.
there is.
I think it might be the first time we had a ghost,
It is.
but it wasn't really a ghost, was it? Oh, that's good. Well, I need to know what some things are. So I need to
Yes.
ask the question, what does that mean?
What does it mean?
What does that mean? Tell you. Um, should I ask you something that I don't understand, or you want to ask me something you don't understand?
Why don't I ask you?
Okay.
Um, in our story, when Jesus is reaching for Peter to make sure he doesn't fall,
Hmm.
he uses a word for him. He says, "faint heart." What does that mean?
What does that mean? Faint heart. Well, sometimes when I'm drawing and I'm not careful and I don't press the pencil down hard enough, I
Hmm.
look back and I go, "Ooh, I didn't, I didn't finish that line. It looks really, really faint, right?" So that's what faint looks like.
Hmm.
And I think that um, when Peter says to Jesus, "Well, if it's you, tell me to come out of the boat," and Jesus said, "It's me. Come ahead." Um, Peter acts, but he checks. It's not like he just recklessly goes, "Oh, look, it's Jesus! Off the boat. I'm going to run across the water." Um, but he says, "Is it really you?" And Jesus says, "Peter, Peter, it's me. Come on." And so I think what happens is that Peter um, has that action. He climbs out of the boat to go to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And when the storm is raging and he's walking on something that isn't like a floor, it's like moving and going up and down, he stops acting and he kind of starts thinking. And thinking and acting are always good things to do at the same time. But when one takes over the other, sometimes you make foolish
Mm.
choices and sometimes you don't make great choices. And sometimes you start to sink. And I think that what Jesus saw was him be really bold. I'm getting out of the boat. Tell me it's you. And then when he looked around, he kind of, I'm really walking on water. Like I think if I stood walking on water, I'd be like, oh, I'm walking on water. And I'd have a faint heart too. So I think that's what it means. Would you think you'd have a faint heart if you were walking on water?
I think I would. It's very different from anything I've ever done before.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're doing something that's very different and a little scary, it's very normal to have a moment like that.
Yeah. And
And I
sometimes the
love
line's
that.
just not so dark.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, I have questions. And
Yeah,
it's almost in the exact same part.
yeah,
Because I talked about what Peter said, but there's really this interesting thing that I don't think I fully understand. So I want to ask you what it means.
yeah.
What do you think it means when it says Peter suddenly bold? What do you think suddenly bold means?
Right? It's almost that opposite thing. When something is bold,
Mm-hmm.
we think of it being, um, if we're thinking about lines again, it stands out versus everything around it.
Yeah.
When we think about something being bold,
Yeah.
it is sometimes in spite of fear.
Mm-hmm.
It is, um, what's a good word for it? Um, it is action. It is, um, I lost my word, but it'll come back at some point.
Okay.
But when we think of something as being bold, it stands out versus everything else. And it is um, in spite of fear. And so in this moment, Peter seizes the opportunity to meet Jesus and to jump into that. And that's what it means when he's suddenly bold.
Do you think that suddenly bold is also about him asking the question about what I was talking about earlier?
I think so. I think so.
You know?
Because the important thing, one of the important things when you're being bold, is to be bold in a way that um, is meaningful,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that is not unnecessarily dangerous.
So he
And
sort of checks
so,
it out.
yeah, um,
Uh,
a good way to be bold is not to run across the street without looking for cars. That's not a good way to be
that's a
bold.
really bad way to be.
That is unnecessarily
That's not
dangerous.
even bold.
Please
That's
don't do
just
that.
silly. That's just not, yeah,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
good.
But he knew that Jesus was waiting for him, and he knew that Jesus was going to be with him no matter what.
Mm.
And so he asks just to make sure that Jesus is with him and that Jesus is there in that moment.
And it's easier to be suddenly bold when you think you stop and think a little bit like, I should look both ways. Better yet, I should go to the crosswalk.
Yes.
So we have read the gospel
Yes.
and we've asked, what does that mean? And
Yes.
now, as always, I have questions.
So many questions.
So many questions. So many questions. So, would you like to ask me a question or would you like me to ask you a question?
Why don't I ask you a question? Um, what do you think of storms?
Depends on the storm. So, I don't know if it rained where you were yesterday or the day before, but it rained and rained and rained and rained and rained. And then I think it even might have rained some more. Did it rain at your house?
It did.
Did it rain really, 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 really hard?
It did. We got a little water in our basement.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
We did not get water in our basement. And because I don't get water in my basement, I love it when it rains like that. And not only do I love it when it rains like that, I'll go and like, especially, well, only if there's not lightning. If there's lightning, I don't do this, but it was just raining yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and stood out in the rain until I couldn't stand it any longer. And I was soaked to the skin, as they say, which means all my clothes were really, really wet. And my hair was much smaller than it was. It was all, and I love doing that. And the dog stares at me like, what are you doing? And my wife stares at me and goes, what are you doing? And she hands me a towel. Those kind of storms, I love those kind of storms.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm asleep and sound asleep and big, like a big crack of thunder and lightning, and I get jolted awake and I'm scared, I don't like that. I don't like that kind of a storm.
Mm-mm.
So, and I've been on a boat when it's
Oh
a
no.
little scary because you think, well, maybe this boat isn't gonna stay boat-like, it'll sink. So sometimes I'm scared of storms. Mostly I really like them, but I'm really, really blessed. I'm usually somewhere safe. And I think that's the difference. So yes, I like storms, and sometimes storms kind of scare me a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been talking about storms and boats. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
What are some ways we can step out of the boat?
That's a great question. What I like about Peter stepping out of the boat, there are a couple things. I like that he took a moment to leave a space that felt comfortable in order to meet God somewhere else. And so I think when we are stepping out of a boat, that's something that we can do. Again, we don't need to do something necessarily that is unnecessarily dangerous.
Yeah.
But sometimes we can do something that's a little bit uncomfortable. Sometimes that could look like if you are walking with your family saying hi to someone who is asking for money, or someone who is in need of food. That can be a little bit uncomfortable. That can be a way to step out and meet God. Sometimes that looks like standing up for the things that you believe in. That can be uncomfortable, but also God is there too.
Yeah.
To do work on behalf of people who are also in the world with us. That can be uncomfortable, and God's there too. So I think there are lots of different ways that we can step out of that boat and find God in the midst of a new place.
Oh, I like that. That's really good. Thank you so much. I might have to practice stepping out of the boat today.
Me too. It's not easy, but it's a good thing to do.
Maybe if our friends are watching this and next week they somehow, somewhere step out of the boat, they can send you a note and tell you about it, because that would be really cool to know about.
I would love that.
Wouldn't that be great? Okay. And if I step out of the boat, I'll let you know. I'll send you a note.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Are you ready to pray?
Yes.
I'm going to pray today, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think if praying takes turns, it's my turn. But I'll pray, and if I miss something big, you just jump right in. How about that?
Sounds good.
But I do have a sign that reminds me where we are. Let us pray with the biggest why in the world.
Yeah.
Creator God, you created us and nature and storms and seas and boats and our hearts and our brains. Be with us now. Help us remember that you are always with us. Help us to remember that when we step out of the boat of our comfort, that you are with us. Help us remember that we need to step out of the boat to do your work in this world. Help us always know that you're with us, even if you feel far away. Know that when I call out, your hand will reach towards me. Thank you for this time together. Thank you for Caleb. Thank you for everybody who watches this with us. Help us remember that we are all in a boat and sometimes we have to step out. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, Caleb, thanks for going to God with me.
Thank you, Michelle. I do feel like I grew a little bit.
I think I grew a little bit, and now I'm going to think about boats a bunch. You have a good week. I'll see you next week, okay?
Sounds great.
All right, bye now.
Bye.